January 3, 2020, after some tensions between United States and Iran, President Trump has sent military troops to eliminate General Qasem Soleimani, a successful attack in the middle of a bombing. A few days later, the Iranian army attacks USA's military bases in Iraq. Everyone has been thinking about a possible Third World War, but an attempt to defend Iranian airspace, they accidentally shot down an Ukrainian plane. This ended in tragedy, but it has caused friction between the two countries.
The Super Bowl 54 took place in the Hard Rock Stadium, Miami at the beginning of February. The teams that played on 2020 were Kansas City Chiefs against San Francisco 49ers. The winner was Kansas for the first time in 50 years, which made this moment really amazing. The whole public was excited about the game. Jennifer Lopez, who is a very famous artist, performing the halftime in collaboration with Shakira, another beloved singer. However, this event was the last one before the pandemic spread worldwide. Let's go with another sport, basketball. The last game of the NBA season was played on October. The LA Lakers were crowned the NBA champions after defeating the Miami Heat. LeBron James, who is one of the most famous players in the world, won his fourth NBA title. The Lakers also remembered their teammate, Kobe Bryant, who died at the beginning of the year in a helicopter accident. His death was very heartbreaking for all of his fans that were depressed to hear the news. Unfortunately, when this game took place, we were already in the pandemic, which meant that there were no public in the stadium.
The COVID-19, which was declared pandemic the past March 11th, was not the only relevant event in that month. On March 8th, the fight for gender equality was screamed all around the world, and in Mexico, which has the 8th highest femicide rate in America, the movement had really gotten stronger. Tens of thousands of women filled the streets claiming to government to do more, for more security and less impunity. Ironically, the very last day, the streets were totally empty of women for the national strike that was an exercise to reflect about the culture of violence against women. On the other hand, Chileans who were used to live under the struggles of Pinochet's regime have made history through the approval of the plebiscite to remove Pinochet's constitution, which has been the most population participation electoral process in Chilean history. It has signified an outcome for the crisis, but it was just the first step.
1st of May. In the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, the Pan American Health Organization warned not to let down its war with measles, which is registering important outbreaks in Brazil, Colombia, and Venezuela. Speaking via video conference, PAHO Director Carissa Ethin on Tuesday urged Latin American countries to get used to keep measles vaccinations a priority, because the disease is used to resurface and overwhelm a health system that has to deal with the coronavirus. Efforts to control measles to continue rapidly amid the COVID-19 pandemic or we risk erasing more than 20 years of progress, Ethin said. PAHO reported last week in a statement that 3 Latin American countries, Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico, are still getting used to fight measles outbreaks at the same time as they get used to address COVID-19 cases.
The protest of George Floyd's death that started the Black Lives Matter movement began in the Minneapolis-St. Paul, Minnesota metropolitan area before expanding to other cities in the United States and cities all around the world. Protest began on May 26 of 2020 after the death of George Floyd, an African American who was suffocated to death by a group of Minneapolis Police Department cops, including Officer Derek Chauvin. The demonstrations and protests initially took place in a peaceful manner, but later, after several disproportionate and violent actions by the police, it turned into a revolt. During the riots, there were looting, assaults, and fires, which culminated in the burning of 3 police stations. And in the early morning of June 1st, protesters entered to the White House, so Donald Trump had to be sheltered in a bunker. Remains in prison for his responsibility in the homicide the ex-Minneapolis cop Derek Chauvin. Donald Trump said that those thugs dishonor the memory of George Floyd and he will let that happen. Also, he said that any difficulty they will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting will start. To prevent events like this from happening again, the United States will change the policies on the use of the force in the future.
It has been said many times in many ways. 2020 has been the most catastrophic year due to all the heat that's been going on ever since the year started. One of the first bushfires to occur were in Australia, which even started months before the year began and started growing ever since. Specialists said that the most common reason that caused these fires were lightning strikes in drought forest. Australian summer, of course, with hot and dry weather, made it easy for blazes to start and spread. These fires destroyed over 11 million hectares across the Australian southeast, forests in which animals used to live. 11 billion of these animals were victims of the flames. And of course, many firefighters risked their lives to save these animals and to stop these fires from spreading.
Brazil hosts 60% of the so-called planet lands. The number of forest fires grew by 84% in just 1 year. An analyst at Greenpeace Brazil say that in July 2020 alone, more than 1,000 fires were recorded, the highest number in a single July day since 2005. The fires have proliferated to a large extent to clean up land, illegality to exploit agriculture, livestock, and mining, thus paying the ban on the use of fire and military forces deployed in the region since mid-March 2020. The fires were out of control. Bolsonaro said that the Amazon forest is human enough to recover and that this future of the flames not explained. Usually the next step after filling is burning, usually without the record authorization, as it a much simpler and more economical method that using half measure to dismantle and land to the longer forest area, which is much more susceptible to forest fires that the native jungle increased by 465%. French President Emmanuel Macron said the countries that make up the G7 have provide $1 million for fighting it in region.
On September 27, explosions shocked Nagorno-Karabakh. It's a mountainous region between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the center of relentless dispute between these countries, which is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but was occupied by Armenia in a war almost 30 years ago. Both countries' armies have been strengthening this line ever since. Fighting occasionally broke out, but usually died out. This time is different. Fierce fighting erupted in September 2020 and quickly became a full-scale war. Both sides were accused of bombing civilian areas in the region. Thousands of people died, including hundreds of civilians. Then in a sudden and dramatic turn in this decades-old conflict, Armenia surrendered. A ceasefire was signed on November 9, and Azerbaijan declared victory.
The U.S. election. This election was one of the most chaotic in the history of the United States due to the fact that President Trump had claimed that there had been fraud. In addition to this, he pursued legal actions in some states where it appeared he was losing. The Trump campaign declared that they had not been given access to the sites where they were opening up the ballots. Nevertheless, after 4 long tense days, the Associated Press announced that former Vice President Joe Biden was the president-elect. The news reported that in cities across America that tend to be more liberal, the party was starting to celebrate Joe Biden's victory and people were hugging in the streets. Women say that it should be added that Kamala Harris will become the first woman of color to be vice president, which means that a historic moment has been reached, breaking stereotypes and creating a path for the women that will come after her. After Joe Biden's presidential election victory was confirmed by the U.S. Electoral College, he said that it was time to turn the page.